right, we are live. Peace and love, everyone. Welcome to my channel. If you are new, please like and subscribe. And I am your host, Queen Tamara. Thank you for joining us this evening and on this lovely Monday, Moon Day. Tonight, we're exploring a very important topic as we continue to dive deeper into the discoveries of our hidden history. We have been exploring history before on my channel as we awaken to greater levels of self-knowledge. It's very imperative that we know more about who we are and our ancestry. And to know thyself is to know your history, your ancestors, what their contributions were to history. And history is very much like the roots of a tree. You know, the ancestors are the roots, we are the branches, if you will. And so tonight we're going to explore some of this history, the history of the so-called American Negroes, so-called Black people in the Americas, and their connection and to Moorish history and the importance of Islam for us. So with our special guest this evening, I'm so excited to have our beloved brother with us, Musa Shabazz, and I'll give him a chance to introduce himself.
Peace, peace, peace.
Peace.
My name is Musa Shabazz, and I'm just a student on this path of consciousness that I've been on for a while, and I deal with a number of things. I deal with the youth a lot because I'm in youth sports, dealing with basketball training for kids, and all the way up to the college and pro levels. And I'm also in the health field, dealing with holistic health. And I'm also an artist. I make music, so I got my hands in a bunch of different things. But ultimately, tying into what we're talking about tonight, dealing with Islam and the spiritual path and consciousness. I've been dealing with that for almost 20 years now, since I was in my teenage years. So that's kind of my background, I would say.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that with us. And all right, so questions. Here we go. Okay, so share with us a little bit about who the Moors were and are, because I know a lot of people are unfamiliar with that term, or they think it's talking about a group of people in a certain geographic region. Could you explain a little bit about that?
Well, the first thing that comes to people's minds when they hear Morse today is the organization of the Moorish Science Temple,
Mm-hmm.
which has a lot of significance in our, people's history here in America, as far as consciousness, the conscious community, and stuff like that, which started with Noble Drew Ali.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of valuable information came from that movement. Um, but then you obviously have the Moorish heritage that goes back hundreds and thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Most of the time in history, when you learn about the Moors, you'll learn about them going into Spain um, and ruling Spain for 700 years, from the year 711 to 1491, I believe, or
Mm-hmm.
14,
1490.
1492 or 1491. I believe it was 1491, and then 1492 is when Christopher Columbus made his voyage here. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and so, but it's so much deeper than that. They try to keep it stuck into that period, that
Mm-hmm.
Moorish Spain period. Um, what you have is basically these, and also the meaning of the word more changed over time,
No, that's
right?
interesting. Yeah, please explain that, because I read in college, I read The Golden Age of the Moor
Right,
by Dr. Ivan Van Sertima.
right. That's a
Yeah.
great piece of work. That's a great,
Mm-hmm.
if people are interested in, Moorish history, that's a great place to start.
Mm-hmm.
Ivan Van Sertima. Um, Another material that I would suggest for people to look into is the Lost Aboriginal Heritage of the So-Called Negro by Amarushi Ali, also known as Dr. Ali Muhammad.
Okay,
Um,
I'm gonna put that in the comments. So
yeah,
What was the title again?
The Lost Aboriginal Heritage of the So-Called Negro.
By who?
Dr. Ali Muhammad, I believe, was the name he was going by at that time. So it's either under that or Amaru Shi Ali. She is spelled Xi. Um,
Or you said Amaru,
yeah,
she
yeah,
Ali. You said
Xi.
she Ali,
Yeah, the she is spelled Xi.
Xi Ali. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna look for that book. I haven't.
But and then he also
Yeah.
has another work called The Lost Pages of Islam, which also goes into the Moorish history. Um, so those are some materials that's good sources for some of what I'll be sharing,
Mm-hmm.
and what you just said, Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, and then also a
Mm-hmm.
lot of what has come out of the Moorish Science Temple, Noble Drew Ali, Circle Seven,
Mm-hmm.
Quran, all those kinds of things. But as I was saying, the term more has taken on different meanings at
Mm-hmm.
during different periods of time. During certain times, you know, what we would today categorize as an Arab uh,
Okay.
might fall under that.
Mm-hmm.
At certain times, depending on who was talking about it. But I would just say, to keep it simple and general, predominantly the term Moor was associated with North and West African, Black African Muslims,
Okay.
right? So, like when you deal with Moorish Spain, that was predominantly a Black African uh, movement or conquest, if you will.
Okay.
Um, and so, what you have is they were entering Spain from the North African region, dealing with what is today Morocco, Mauritania, Tunisia, all of that. And you had what was, what some would consider the Moroccan Empire.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this spanned all the way into like certain areas that is now considered like Senegal. This was an empire that involved many different territories, right?
I see. Okay.
The same way that like when you study the Roman Empire in history,
Mm-hmm.
that like involved many different, what today would be different European countries, was under this one empire, right? So we had an empire. And basically, in 1491, when Spain, the white Spaniards basically were able to come back into power and kind of push those Moors out of Spain.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and as Europe got stronger, they kind of like started pushing those Moors further down up out of Europe, right?
Okay.
So this is why when you get into the like the 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, this Moorish empire starts to move further like down and west into what is now Mali and Ghana. So when
Mm-hmm.
you see the Mali Empire in the 1200s, 1300s, 1400s with Mansa Musa and Abu Bakr and all these people,
Yes.
that is that same empire under a different name. It's the
Okay.
same.
So the same empire, but they just had territories in Europe. That's what you're telling me.
Yes,
Okay.
because well, even when they had those territories in Europe, the seat of that empire was um primarily in what we would call Morocco today, right?
Okay.
But like many other empires, the headquarters or the capital or the seat of that empire may change over time, right? So like in
Yes.
even like today in America, like in a particular state or in a country, the capital might change, right? So
Yes.
different circumstances came about that where that the seat of the empire may have changed. So when you have the Mali Empire coming about, that's that same lineage of people, but that area of where Mali is today became the seat
Mhm.
of that empire, right? And then
Okay.
at another time, it was the Ghana Empire, and what they call also the Songhai Empire. These are
Mhm.
all different iterations of the same empire, same lineage under different names in different periods of time,
Okay. Okay.
right? And this empire, like, basically existed that period right there, like 700s to 1400s. That is what they've primarily focus on. They block
Mhm.
out what happened from the 1400s up until what we're now calling slavery. Like,
Mhm.
when slavery really started ramping up, like 1600s, 1700s, like
1700s. Mhm.
that 1400s to 1700s, and also before 700s. That's the Moorish history that they block out,
Correct.
right? So they're boxing us
Mhm.
in to this Northwest African period of 700s to 1400s. So I say all that to say that basically that period is what you will commonly run into as far as like what is considered Moorish history, and for layman's
Mhm.
and stuff like that. So I'll just start with that and say that, but there's much more to the story when you start coming up out of those 1400s up into the 1700s, and what they buried there, and what happened prior.
Okay. You mentioned the Moors being in Spain, which I have, in school they did mention that just a little bit, and in what they call what I would call mainstream history. I had a question: were the Moors by any chance indigenous to Spain, Portugal, the Iberian region, or were they migrants that moved into Southern Europe and built their built their kingdoms there or whatever?
According to the information that I've come across, they were migrants that moved up in there and basically was part of
Mhm.
this movement of Africans civilizing Europe.
Okay.
Because at that time, Europe was in what we now call the Dark Ages, where they were
Hmm.
dealing with a lot of excess disease, death, lack of technology, lack of medicine, lack of hygiene, education, and all these things. So the Moors basically were responsible for this process of civilizing it into what is now known as the Renaissance period in Europe. So
Okay.
when you started having all this philosophy and medicine and science in
Sciences, yeah.
in Europe, they call this the Renaissance period, but they just don't tell you that they got this from the introduction of Moors into European society. And
Okay.
this goes into our conversation about the importance of Islam, because today Islam is just looked at as like a religion, a belief
Hmm.
system, but Islam at its core and at that time deals with science.
Hmm.
And so the early Islamic civilizations were highly advanced scientifically. So they had a lot of universities. This is where you get Timbuktu, and there were very prominent Islamic universities in Spain and in Europe. So,
Hmm.
but your question does there is something to your question, because as we study more and more, we learn that the first inhabitants of Europe were dark skinned indigenous or black people as well. So
Hmm.
it's very likely that even when the Moors went up in there, that there were already darker skinned people there that were just indigenous to that land that had been there,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So that is something that is to be looked at, and as we continue studying, we'll learn more and more about that as well.
More and more, no pun intended.
That's right.
Okay, yeah. So that's interesting. That you shared that. Now you said that the term Moor changed throughout history. It had, well, it had different meanings at different time periods. Did you already break that down, or could you explain that? Because I was under the um impression that the term Moor meant any person that was brown or, dark skin complexion, whether they were from Africa, the Americas, India, maybe, perhaps.
Yeah, it was used in that way.
Yes, because I
Um,
wasn't sure if it was exclusive of just the Muslims that came from Northwest
right.
Africa, or did it mean all people of color, or
It was
both?
used. It was used in both ways.
Okay.
Because what you got to understand is at that time Islam was such a powerful force that
Hmm.
the majority of black Africans that were coming into Europe and interacting with Europe were Muslims,
Okay.
right? And but they did also call non-Muslim Africans Moors as well. So that's where it gets kind of, it could get kind of tricky and blurry
Mm-hmm.
as far as how it was used, you know, in different times and by whom.
Hmm.
Um, in that material, Lost Aboriginal Heritage that I refer to, um, Dr. Ali does a great job of tying the word more linguistically and showing, its roots and showing that it goes way further back than just, the 700s and 800s and that period. When you look at Kemet, which is
Hmm.
ancient Egypt, to those that don't know, another name for Kemet was Ta Mary, right?
Hmm.
And that Ta Mary or Ta Murray, that you see that term more in there, Ta Murray. And the way that it was spelled is TA/MRY.
Hmm.
And what that word meant was heir to the land,
Mm.
basically indigenous,
Hmm.
right? It's a political status, as a
Okay.
lot of the Moorish brothers from the Moorish Science Temple would, they focus a lot on political status, right? So
Yes, sovereignty. Yes. Hmm.
yeah, so this dealt with a political status, and if you go now, this is where it gets real deep. Is when you go into the ancient American history, the
Hmm.
oldest civilization here is, what they call the Olmec civilization.
Yes.
That's a term that uh, was applied or superimposed on that civilization, but
Yes.
the name that civilization called themselves was two primary names. It was the Shi, which is that name that I mentioned to you earlier, the Xi, the Shi,
She.
and Amaru. And
Mm.
in that word Amaru, you have you Amaru, right?
Mm. Hmm.
And what you're dealing with is this ancient lineage of people were a global empire. So
Hmm.
going all the way back into the times of the Shi, the Olmec, all the way up into the Mayan period, there was interaction from that ancient American civilization and ancient African civilization. This is why now there's all these findings of tobacco in
Hmm.
Egyptian mummies, for example, and
Hmm.
tobacco is only found in America. It's indigenous to America. So it's like, how did this tobacco end up in these um, Egyptian mummies' stomachs, as
Hmm.
well as like the coca plant, coca leaf, um,
Yes.
and you see
Corn.
yeah, you see ancient
Yeah.
Egyptian hieroglyphs in the Grand Canyon, right?
Mm.
So when you really uncover this thing, you see this interaction between ancient Americans and ancient Africans But the ultimate truth of this is that it was one lineage on both land masses, right?
Okay.
That were going back and forth and intermixing with each other for thousands of years. We don't even know how long it's been going. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad told us that we're older than these continents itself. There's
Mm-hmm.
no birth record for the black man and woman, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these land masses, Africa and America, at one time they didn't exist. It was all one land mass called Pangea, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as these land masses started forming, it was still one people, but in different bodies of land, they were still interacting.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why you see these terms like Moor showing up in these different regions at different periods of time,
Okay.
denoting this one lineage that's really an empire. And again, that empire changed names in different periods of time. So you have this She Olmec, She Amaru empire, and when you move, you move to Kemet, Ta Murray, you have that empire, and as that fell, shortly thereafter, you have this new thing called Islam that came up,
Mm-hmm.
which was again that same lineage, because when you do the knowledge on it, you learn that the first Muslims were Black Africans,
Mm-hmm.
right? That really were the same lineage of these, Northeast Africans and what is now considered the Middle East, that were of that Kemetic lineage and Kemetic empire, right? So now, when you fast forward to what I was dealing with earlier with like the, Moorish Spain period, like 700s to 1400s, mind you, also in the 700s, 800s, you have Quranic inscriptions that have been found in America as well, like in
Mm-hmm.
places like Nevada. So that shows again like this continuous interaction from over there across the water over here, and it's just this one people. And so what you see is like, okay, after the 1300s and 1400s, you have these migrations that took place as Europe started to gain power and momentum, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they're pushing their way down into, you know, places like Egypt and Tunisia and Morocco. That's why today, when you look at these places, they're very lighter, pale skinned or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
These are not the original place people of these areas that are there today. They conquered these lands. So as that happened, you had these migrations of darker skinned people, these Moors, these Muslims, going into a little bit, south of that into the west. Like I said,
Mm-hmm.
Mali, Ghana, Songhai. You have
Mm-hmm.
Senegal. You're
Mm-hmm.
very familiar with Senegalese people. If you talk to certain Senegalese elders about their lineage, they will tell you that they have lineage that goes back to ancient Egypt.
Mm. Okay.
So, I would say that to your question about the meaning of the term more and the relevance of that term.
Interesting. Okay. Now let's bring it home to the Americas and the Caribbean, because I know you and I were having a talk one time. And you were sharing some information with me. Um, so I wanted to know how are the Moors that were in Europe, Northwest Africa, and the Americas connected?
They were always connected because they were always on both lands, right?
Mm,
So we have this. The way they tricked us is by making us think that Moors is an African thing or a West African thing, but really it was on both lands the whole time. It's just that the seat
okay.
of the empire changed over time. So
Mm,
the Moorish period they got us stuck on this, 700s to 1400s, 16. At that time, the seat of the empire was in Northwest Africa.
mm-hmm.
So generally when people think of the Moors, they think that like, oh, that's them folk that came from Northwest Africa, whatever.
Mhm. Mhm.
But we were on both lands the whole time. So
Mm.
when you look at the Caribbean, some would say that, okay, when you look at who they say are the first indigenous Indians in the Caribbean, they call them the Caribs,
Mhm.
right? If you just take the first letter off of that, the C, what do you have? You have Arabs,
Arab. Mhm.
right? Now, there's a debate over the term Arab. I mean, everybody, I mean, not everybody, but the information definitively shows that the first Muslims were black people, right? Black
Mhm.
people or black Africans, what have you. And so that the first Arabs, the original Arab, like the original everything was black, dark skin, indigenous, what have you. Now, some would say, well, those first Muslims, they didn't call themselves Arabs. That's a foreign term. There's debate over that. But
Mhm.
this whole Carib thing and Caribbean word
Mhm.
does point to, we would need to study more, but it does point to this presence of these Muslims, Moors in this region,
Okay.
right? Um, and you see in a lot of documentation in the Americas when you start to come up into the um, period where Europeans started coming over here, like 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, you see that the Moorish flag was flown here among different Caribbean peoples and American indigenous tribes. And the reason why
Mhm.
you're seeing this Moorish flag consistently across different tribes is because, and this goes into our conversations about the importance of Islam, is that
Mhm.
Islam was the unifying system to globally unify indigenous peoples
Mm. Okay.
because it was a system that had principles in it that had roots in our ancient systems.
I see. Okay.
And also, there's just something about Islam that just has a power to like resurrect a people, as you see with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and
Yes.
the discipline factor, and there's a
Mhm.
divinity to it. If you ask me,
Mhm.
there's a divinity to it that has a power to transform a people
Mhm.
and um, rebel against oppression, which is why
Yes.
they forced us to convert to Christianity as slaves, right?
Mhm.
Most of these rebellions that were taking place with Muslims early on.
Okay.
So that's the connection with the Caribbean
Mhm.
and in Americas, and tying that into what I just said about the rebellions.
Mhm.
Whenever they talk about these small groups of slaves that had successful rebellions
Mhm.
that escaped and set up their own communities, whether it was in Jamaica, Haiti, or in Americas,
Mhm.
what do they call them? They
Maroon.
they call them maroons. So isn't
Mhm.
it ironic that in all of these different islands that you would think, based on how they tell us history, that these people weren't communicating with each other. Like slaves in Haiti, how were they communicating with slaves in Jamaica, communicating with slaves in North America to all
Right.
have the same name? And they would um a common thing with these maroons is that they would wear red, and red was the Moorish flag.
Mm. Okay. So the ancient Moorish flag was red. Okay.
Yes, yes. So that's where you see a lot of that deep Caribbean Moorish history, but you gotta dig to really find it because they really buried it. You know,
Hmm.
they really buried, and we're still uncovering it to this day.
Yes. Yes. Now, as far as history being buried, yes, I agree. However, sometimes things come to the surface, elements of culture come to the surface, and it's, these are traditions and customs that are passed down generation from generation. A lot of times people don't know the origin of them. And a lot of this stuff goes back to our ancient history. So when you were mentioning something you said a couple of minutes ago about Islam being like a remnant of our ancient, systems or something you were saying, and so that was the unifying force. What else do you think? Is there a common culture or language or something that ties us together?
I mean, when you look at, for example, Dr. Wesley Muhammad did some great works on the parallels between Islam and Ma'at, the
Mm.
Kemetic spiritual system,
Okay.
on how they prayed in similar ways. The,
Mm-hmm.
the the prayer system was similar in their positions, um, and the times of day, and the performing ablution, the wudu. You know how
Mm-hmm.
you prepare for prayer with the water and washing yourself. These were things that were people don't notice, but these things were present in Kemet as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, these were customs that uh, were present in more ancient times that kind
Mm-hmm.
of because we had different periods where we were in power and then we started to lose power because we were warring with these Europeans and pale Arab groups. And so at different periods of time, they might have gained momentum and we lost momentum and we kind of started to fall asleep a little bit and then we would wake back up.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, today, we're in the worst sleep that we've ever been.
Mm.
We're completely asleep.
Sleep
But there
still.
were other periods where we lost power, but we didn't all the way lose it. But we kind of were just like on some BS, and we had to be woken
Mm-hmm.
back up. And that's what Islam was at that time. It was taking ancient principles and kind of like repackaging it and
Mm.
to give us a boost and put us back into our proper position.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Good answer. Good, good. All right. And so you mentioned the connection to the Maroons in the Caribbean and how that connects with the Moors, the Moorish Empire. So would you say that and there were maroon colonies all over. There were some in Brazil, there were, in the Caribbean, here in North America. Were they all members of that Moorish Empire?
Yeah, this Moorish Empire was the same way today. How America is what's the term that they use? The superpower.
Mm-hmm.
America today is the superpower on the earth. United States is really an empire. The difference between today and in ancient times
Mm-hmm.
is today the empire disguises itself as just this one nation state, but
Mm-hmm.
the United States of America is really an empire because it has military bases. People might not know this, but
Worldwide.
yeah, the United States has 1,000 military bases all across the world, all up in Middle East and South America, Asia, Africa,
Mm-hmm.
and in all
True.
of these territories, they have corporations there that are parasiting off of the resources in those areas. That's an empire.
Mm-hmm.
The
That's the
United
empire.
States is the United States of America is not just this, this country as we see it in North America. It's an empire that
Mm-hmm.
expands. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
the Moorish Empire was the superpower of that time.
Okay.
So this doesn't mean that all indigenous or black people were part of this empire, but
Yes.
it was the predominant superpower and the reason why so many indigenous tribes allied, with that power is because of what I just described about these ancient principles that these tribes already had that were in Islam. So they're looking at Islam like, oh, okay, yeah, we rock with that. Like we already on that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
one God and the discipline and not partaking in a lot of the um, deviant practices that came about with Christian European culture,
Mm-hmm.
right? So Islam was and to this day, and this is the power of Islam, is that it's a protection against that
Mm-hmm.
deviant culture
Mm.
that came up out of Europe and that's still present today that we're under now, right?
Mm.
So yeah, like all up into South America. Like I said, that Moorish flag, you see that flag that it was flown in Suriname. I haven't seen. I'm not sure if it was
I
in
have to
Brazil,
look at it.
if it was Brazil as well. But
Mm-hmm.
again, this history is so buried. We just got to keep
Mm-hmm.
studying,
Mm-hmm.
and see where all the places that it was present.
Yes. Yeah, because there were pockets. I shouldn't say pockets. There were groups of independent, Moors here and there around the Americas. I do know Brazil had a significant population.
Right.
Um, they lived in different areas. Some of them were called quilombos. There were, people in Mexico and, of course, here and as well as the Caribbean.
Yeah.
So, um, let's see. What are some historical monuments that still have survived to this day that remind us of our Moorish past? Because as I learn more and more about our, no pun intended, our history here, um, in the old world history, you start to notice things, and a lot of places have names that out of place, like there's cities here in the US named Mecca and Medina, other names that sound curiously non British. We don't hear a lot about the um Muslims who were here with the early colonists. We don't hear much of that here. So that's something that most of us have to, study and investigate on our own. But what are some historical places that you're aware of that still bear that that historical significance with the Moors?
Well, for one, you just mentioned a few of them, like cities that are named like Mecca and Medina and stuff like that here
Hmm.
in the Americas, and you would think how much America hates Islam, they would never name,
Name
you
right,
know,
a town that right.
yeah. Right here in Georgia,
Hmm.
we have Arabia Mountain that I love to go to all the time,
Oh, okay. Do
and
tell. Is
it's
that anywhere near Stone Mountain?
yeah, it's
Oh, it is?
not far from Stone Mountain. It's in, I believe, it's DeKalb County.
Okay.
And these places like Stone Mountain and Arabia Mountain
Mhm.
were sacred sites, of
Mhm.
indigenous people. These are places that have very potent spiritual energy there. Um,
Mm.
so we have Arabia Mountain here. Now, you mentioned, for example, Mecca and Medina, right? That in
Mhm.
California, correct?
There is a Mecca, California, in Southern California, but there's a few other states that have towns called Mecca.
So when
I
you
just can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but I do know the one in California. I
right,
know of the one in California.
right. So when you look at California,
Mm.
people will talk a lot about how that comes from Queen Khalifa.
Mhm.
Right now, when you look that up, that is generally told as a myth. It's a mythology
Yes.
that this queen named Khalifa and stuff like that. So
Mhm.
people will need to show and prove, you know, um, whether that is a historical figure that can be proven or
Mm-hmm.
what have you. But when you look at that term, caliph, that is an
Caliph.
Islamic
Yeah.
word.
Mm-hmm.
Caliph basically is, the vicegerent of Allah, like
Mm-hmm.
a political ruler that stands in the place of Allah on earth, basically to rule in a righteous manner. Um, and so you see that in California. Now, when you come here to the southeast in Florida, there's a town called Opelika, and
Mm-hmm.
that town is all Moorish architecture.
Yes, I've seen pictures of. I think I've driven through Opelika, but yes, in fact, Florida has a lot of Moorish architecture in
Yeah.
its cities. It is almost like whoever built it looks very much like what you see in places like Arizona, New Mexico.
Florida is filled with it because
Hmm.
Florida is one of the areas where we were the most, you know,
Dominant.
dominant and powerful,
Hmm.
especially militarily when Europeans started to kind of like
Hmm.
gain momentum and strength. We were still defeating them. They had this whole narrative that they just came over here and just started, taking over right away, basically.
Right.
Um, and that these were primitive people over here and stuff like that. And that's what this Moorish history debunks, is that they have this narrative that over here and in Africa, the people were just like in these little tribes and these little huts with no technology, no
Hmm.
civilization, anything, and they just came in and just took everything over overnight. And
Hmm.
that's not how it happened. That's why I keep on using the term empire, because that kind of drills in people's head that this was a advanced civilization, which it was. So
Hmm.
in Africa and here, it was
Hmm.
an empire and advanced civilization where in Florida, the Seminoles were defeating the Europeans for a long time. We had
Hmm.
wars that lasted hundreds of
Yeah.
years. They didn't just defeat us overnight.
Hmm.
So for hundreds of years, they were losing. The Europeans were losing. And so the Seminoles has had a very rich Moorish connection. And a lot of their chiefs and prominent, uh, figures had Moorish
Hmm.
names and Moorish lineage and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Um, so that's why you see places like Opelika, all Moorish architecture,
Hmm.
right? So that I would say now here in Georgia,
Hmm.
I did see a brother that he I can't even say what his name was. You're here in Georgia and saying that it was Moorish. I need to look more into it. Again, this is a
Okay.
subject that's so buried. We're only
Hmm.
we're only scratching the surface,
Hmm.
right? So this is part of our
Yeah.
work to uncover this. But yeah, I would say that is the most prominent and place that people could start looking at is Opelika.
Opelika, Florida. Okay. Yeah, it's you see it throughout cities, especially major cities. As you drive around, you see what some people call Tartarian
Hmm.
empire architecture, and you see a lot of buildings that have especially in downtown areas, um some government buildings in some states, their capital and well, not just some of their buildings. When you look at them, they really look ancient, and the way they're built, they're very different than um some of the other things that were built in, the antebellum South. And then you see things like courtyards with large fountains, which looks a lot like what you see in Turkish architecture, Turkish mosque, Turkish, Islamic art architecture. You see a lot of stuff that looks curiously like that in the US. And even some of the churches, like some of the older churches, if you notice, they kind of look similar. Like some of the, especially, some of the churches look more like Orthodox church buildings, or
Right.
look like some look like mosques actually,
Yeah. Yeah.
that may have been repurposed into churches,
Yep. Absolutely.
or other buildings. Yeah.
Mm.
Interesting. I would love to do like a tour, and just, look at all of them, and document a lot of this stuff. Um in school, very little was mentioned about the Moors in history, and the little bit that was mentioned, they talked about how many of them fled to Africa after, the 1490s, and when they were being expelled from Spain and Portugal. Why do you think they left so much of the Moorish history out? Like, like you said, there's the timeline. They just kind of like it abruptly stops in the 1490s. Why do you think that is?
Because of what I just said, they want this narrative that we were these primitive people when they enslaved us.
Mm-hmm.
Like that we didn't have this. Basically, the Moorish Empire was the last entity, the last empire that we were under before being, taken over, enslaved,
Mm-hmm.
colonized, etc. So, and because like I said, Islam has a unique power to unify us and
Mm-hmm.
civilize us and dignify us. As the
Mm-hmm.
Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, Islam dignifies. And that's
Yes.
the number one problem with our people today is we're in such a degenerated state culturally.
Mm-hmm.
And the number one thing that scares people, like amongst our people, like the number one thing that scares people about Islam, like the thing that pushes them away
Mm-hmm.
from Islam, is the same thing that is its secret power, and that is the structure, the discipline,
Mm-hmm.
its ability to dignify. Like the same thing that people are afraid of. That's our key to success.
It's the self discipline, and
The
the
discipline
um
and the
the
structure.
structure of it, the orderliness of it.
It's
Yeah.
a it's a medicine
Mm,
for a people that have been turned into a savage state, that have lost the knowledge of themselves, the knowledge of their history, their name, their culture, their religion. Right. So it that's why they hide it from us, because it is the key to art. Because when we dealing with Moorish and Islam, is really one and the same to a degree. Meaning, like when we say Moorish Empire, all this was an Islamic style government, right?
yes.
Like
Mm-hmm.
um even in some of the treaties, people always talk about these Moorish treaties and stuff like that. In these
Mm-hmm.
treaties, a lot of times, the name Muslim was the term used for the citizens of this empire. So
Mm-hmm.
Muslim isn't just a religion. Islam isn't just a religion. It's a nationality. It's a government.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's a lifestyle.
the same way that today, okay, sometimes when people talk about America, they use the term America. Sometimes they
Mm-hmm.
use the United States. Sometimes the United States of America.
Yes.
When you have England, sometimes they say England. Sometimes they say Great Britain. Sometimes they
UK.
say
Yeah.
the UK,
Mm-hmm.
United Kingdom. So that's all that is. When we're dealing with Moorish and Islam, it's the same. It's really the same thing ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
And that is why they cover it up, because it was the government that we were under prior to being colonized,
Okay.
and it is the structure that unifies us globally as indigenous people.
Mm-hmm.
dignified us so that we could
Mm-hmm.
be, the natural rulers that we are.
No, it was some background noise. I had to mute. So yes, very good. All right. Before I know we're getting closer to time, but are there any other things that you like to share with the listening audience as far as the importance of, like you mentioned, Islam for indigenous people?
I would just, urge people to study and research independently because so much of Islam has been propagandized
Mm-hmm.
from outside of Islam and from inside of Islam. Like the
Mm-hmm.
majority of what you see as Islam today is not Islam. It's
Okay.
been Arabized, you know, by outsiders. And this is a
Mm-hmm.
whole other, discussion as far as like the history of Islam and, you know, what's considered Islamic and what's not. Like, um, a lot of that has been tampered with in the same way that, we say the Bible was tampered with.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just urge people to start with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad,
Mm-hmm.
and from there study with an open mind, um, to tap back into this, spiritual and cultural system that was our success. And I'm convinced that today that we don't have success ultimately without it. We'll just, because even when we talk about like our economic problems as a people and stuff like that, if we
Mm-hmm.
get our economic stuff together but we don't get our cultural spiritual stuff together, it's just gonna be some savagery still. We're just gonna have money and be in a savage state
Undisciplined
still.
about it. Yeah.
So that's not
Mm-hmm.
gonna fix our problem. And when you look at different movements that we've had, this is why there's only been one movement that had in mass success as far as amongst our people in, modern America, and that was the Nation of Islam under the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. You had other very significant movements, like
Mm-hmm.
I always say that Marcus Garvey and the UNIA was probably the best or the most successful movement outside of what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad did. What Garvey did economically,
Mm-hmm.
um, and his ability to unify our people here and in the diaspora was very impressive. But it was for the most part just an economic movement. It didn't deal with your lifestyle, how you live, how you eat, your spiritual connection to God,
I see.
and these things. So what Don Elijah Muhammad did and what Islam did is it's a holistic medicine. It's a
Mm.
holistic approach that deals with economics, culture, spirituality, how you eat, family structure,
Mm-hmm.
all of these things. And that's why it lasted. Even
Mm-hmm.
today, some would, different people have their, critiques on the Nation of Islam today or what have you, but it's still here, and it's still the last hope and the last pillar in the Black community that is a positive influence and image in the Black community,
Mm-hmm.
right? That has significant relevance that people can look at and learn from and be transformed by. So I would just say that I would just urge people to study with an open mind and tap back into their birthright, their culture.
Indeed. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. If anyone, we're wrapping up time now, if wants to reach out to you, maybe to ask some questions or know more about this history, I would love to have you on the show again to talk some more because there's so many topics that we explored this evening, and they're all like discussions in and of themselves. So we probably have maybe do some follow-ups to this, but any way that they can reach you, maybe on social media, you have a website.
Uh, yeah, most people could just reach out to me on social media, Instagram, at Musa.76 trillion. That's
Okay. You want
Musa
me to put that?
dot
I can put that in the comments. So what
okay.
is it?
Musa
It's at
dot
Musa. Wait a minute. Where's that at? Musa dot
76 trillion.
spell the number out or right, just 76 trillion.
It'll take you too long to write the number out. It's just
You know how
76.
people have stuff online. This is all kind of wild stuff with underscores and stuff. So
Yeah, just 76 and then the word trillion.
okay, so Musa dot 76 trillion. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I put that. You know, we can get creative
That's
with the
right.
names online.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Well, thank you so much for being a guest on the show and for sharing this information with us, because it's so important that we know more about history and start just exploring and studying, researching, looking up our genealogy, which I'm still working on mine, and our lineage, because it's so important that we know, like you mentioned, a little while ago, that some people in Senegal can trace their lineage back to their ancient foreparents in Egypt. And then a lot of us, when we think of our family history, many of us start with slavery, but slavery interrupted our history. There's so much more, and our history goes back, and our ancestry goes back further beyond that, and we shouldn't just limit ourselves just to one narrative. When we see that our story, a lot of it has not been told, and as we discover and learn more about ourselves and our ancestry, we'll be surprised. And it's very informative learning more about who we are, where we came from, and the things that unite us, the unifying things that unite us as a people. Yes.
Absolutely. And I commend you for doing the work that you're doing, because
Thank
this is the work,
you.
is sharing this information so that our people can be, brought back into the knowledge of themselves.
Mhm. Yes. And even though we encourage you all, to do your own research as well, but thank you for sharing this information with us. And, we're working here at Astro Healing Arts to just shed light on all aspects of our lives. And, we're breaking thousands of years of false conditioning. And as we're learning who we are and where we come from. So we thank you for this and for sharing with us. And hopefully see you on the show again in the near future.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
All right.
Inshallah.
All right. Inshallah. All right. So peace and love, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And we will see you next time.